Welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes Ministries. Thank you for listening. Janet will be talking about her struggle with addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, unwanted same-sex attraction, and living a homosexual life. Janet has survived all those things by the grace of God. Janet's not a doctor, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychotherapist, she's not a licensed counselor. Janet is an ordained pastor and wants to show you God's promises, how God has set her free, and how you can be set free. What He has done for her, He will do it for you. If healing and freedom are what you want, you have come to the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Here is Janet Boynes.
I'm so excited because we're going to talk about suicide today, something that not only I dealt with, but my guest has dealt with. But before I introduce her, I want to mention what American Foundation for Suicide Prevention said. They said that there's no single cause for suicide. Suicide most often occurs when stressors and health issues converge to create an experience of hopelessness and despair. Depression is the most common condition associated with suicide, and it is often undiagnosed or untreated. Conditions like depression, anxiety, and substance problems, especially when addressed, increase risk for suicide. Yet, it is important to note that most people who actively manage their mental health conditions go to engage in life. And then it also says in Kaiser Family Foundation, I wanted to know how many suicides there were a year. And in 2024, they published that approximately 49,000 suicide deaths in the United States. And according to a February 2025 news report referencing the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, an estimated 740,000 deaths from suicide occur worldwide each year. My guest is Renee Alexandre. Renee, welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes.
Janet.
Renee, I've been trying to get you on my show for a minute. You've had a baby a year ago and you just had another baby. How's that?
Oh, it's glorious. It's glorious. And it's also a lot of chaos.
You know, somebody said to me, and I never had kids, you don't really understand love until you have a child.
Amen. Yes.
It goes deeper than the love for your spouse, from what I hear, even though you love your spouse, but there's something about a child.
No, absolutely. It's definitely a huge help to look down and see those precious, precious eyes looking back at you when you are running on pure love at that point at 3 a.m. and then again at 4 a.m. and then 5 a.m. You're running off of a lot of love at that point.
Unconditional.
Unconditional love. That's right.
Well, you look beautiful.
Thank you.
Nobody would have known that you just had a baby, what, a month ago?
Yes, you're too kind.
Well, let's dive into it. You and I have had many conversations. You and your husband travel with me and speak at my conferences. Your husband does, and it's a blessing to have you there. But we talked about suicide in your family. Let's get into it. Your father committed suicide.
He did.
When did you find out that he was suicide, if you did find out, or you didn't find out until he committed suicide?
Yeah, I didn't find out until he actually took his own life. I kind of had a suspicion that Dad was struggling mentally, and was struggling with depression, and he was, combining. He had a string of injuries at work, and they were giving him pain medicine for that, and he was also laid off of work, and so he hadn't ever not worked for a long period of time, which he couldn't because the workman's comp was very strict about when he could and when he could not work. And so he was combining his pain meds and also alcohol. And so during that time, I had a suspicion that something was not right. And at that point, he's in Texas, I'm in DC, and all I could do was talk to him over the phone and really hope that that was going to pass. That time, that glimpse of time was going to pass for him. And it did, but unfortunately, Dad ultimately did end up taking his own life.
You said something that I think is very interesting. You said you had a suspicion. What gave you some type of suspicion outside of the alcohol use, drug use, possibly, that there's a possibility your father was suicidal?
I just remember having phone calls with him, where you could really hear the despair in his voice. Um, and yeah, it's just you could I could hear it. I was raised by my dad, and so I knew him in and out. I knew where he was mentally. I knew just by how he would answer the phone, his tone in his voice. I knew everything there was to know about him, and so I guess just from really paying attention to him and his personality, I knew that he was really struggling at that time.
When someone is struggling with some sort of depression, how old were you when you had an idea that, dad's going through something and I don't know what it is?
Mhm.
How old were you at that time?
Goodness. Um, I would say probably around 12 years old. I knew that something was off. But I just thought, well, my dad was very strict about the weekday is for work and, we're going to be in bed at this time. But then when the weekend came, Saturday, sometimes Friday, um, dad was going to drink. And sometimes, you know, the drinking would lead to him being upset. Um, and I didn't really understand that until I think I was maybe 15. And then dad explained a little bit more about, his childhood and things like that. And that's when I really understood, okay, um, something's different here.
What about his childhood, if you'd be open to talk about, because I think it's gonna help my viewers. I'm talking with Renee Alexandre regarding her father committing suicide, because we know there's many, men and women that are dealing with depression. I dealt with it and thought about suicide, when my mother passed away. Thank God I went and got the help, and they put me on meds, and I'm not ashamed of it because I want people to know how serious this is, even leaders like myself can go through depression, and we go through a lot. But with your dad, what was going on in his childhood that would cause him to think possibly, "I just don't wanna live anymore?"
I think, and at the time, I couldn't handle all of what it was that dad, I feel like, needed to talk about. And so from the little bit that I grasped, he was abused um, in various ways by his mother's boyfriend as a young child. Um, and so that was something that he never, I believe, told many people, and he never got help for that. And I think that ultimately that's something that when the weekend came, he tried to drown those memories of what happened to him as a young boy.
I think it's amazing that your father came out and shared that with you, so you'll have an understanding, one day if he did commit suicide. Did anyone go to him at that time, or did your mother or relatives or friends, those who knew about it, did they ask him to get help?
I don't believe so. And it's dad was such a strong, resilient man. And um everybody had so much respect for him. And I now I deeply regret letting that respect override me being more bold and telling him that he needs to get help. Um, I love my dad. I adored him. Everything, he did was amazing to me in my eyes. And I could not bring myself to say, Dad, you need to get help. I just felt like that was disrespectful. And now looking at it, that could have been the most loving thing that I could have done for him, is to tell him that.
The thing is, many times I hear from friends, those that are the strongest are the ones you should keep an eye on,
Absolutely.
because we don't talk about a lot of things that we're going through until it's too late. And I tell people, those of you that are listening or watching on YouTube or this pod or listening to this on podcasts, check on those that are the strong ones who never ask for help, because they're the ones who really do need the help. When this happened, so Renee, do you have siblings?
I do. I have one sister.
How did your dad's suicide impact her?
Oh, it actually affected her a lot worse than it did myself. Thank the Lord, I have him to lean on, and she does not. And well, she does, but she doesn't know that. She doesn't take assurance in that. And she also has a young son. I believe he was 9 years old at the time that my dad was filling the role for him as his father. And so that tremendously impacted the both of them in a very terrible way. My sister, and I think still struggles with dad's death, even 8 years later.
I met your nephew, at the conference. You have him over your house for a part of the summer, and handsome kid, just growing, man. I bet you he's really tall by now. I haven't seen him in a few years. But everybody responds differently to suicide or death. When you really think about it, your sister could be like, Dad will never see my child grow up. Your dad will never meet your children, and that can impact you in so many ways, and it brings up so many memories. Just having this conversation, I can see in your face that, I have to ask, have you fully dealt with the death of, the suicide of your dad, and did you go get counseling for help?
I I believe that I am in a very good spot with understanding everything that surrounded dad's death, why I feel like I have the why. Of course, random days will come up, like you said, when you have your own children. When I had my first daughter, I was very sad knowing that she was never going to get to meet the amazing man who raised me. And then again, when I had my second daughter, I just had a few minutes, which now I will let myself have, of thinking, man, he is really missing out on a lot of wonderful things. Um, but I did not seek counseling. What was really helpful for me uh, was reading through. It was actually a sermon that helped me to draw back to the Lord and seek out biblical verses on how I'm going to get through this, and that's what I did. And one of my favorite books in the Bible is James, and it tells you to ask the Lord for wisdom, and He'll give it to you. And He definitely did. He did that for me, and I'm very, very grateful. And in that wisdom, I did join a survivors group on Facebook, and it's a very heavy group to be a part of, but it was also very healing for me to be able to share that experience and know that you're not crazy yourself for thinking all of the thoughts that come up after somebody, a loved one, takes their own life.
Right.
It was so healing to see all these different people struggling in the same way that I am. And what became very therapeutic for me was going in and seeing these people hurting and praying specifically for them in their need. I would have a little notebook that I would write down people's names that I didn't know, but I knew their story because,
Yeah.
share a lot in these groups. And I
Mhm.
put their names down and I would uh, pray for them specifically on what they were struggling with. And that was very, very healing for me.
Yeah, it's good to have that community of
Mm,
friends who can relate to what we're going through because a lot of people don't look for, the people who are like-minded in that particular area, saved or not saved. The thing is, that's your community of people because they went through what you went through. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention said, they give out some of the warning signs, and some of the warning signs for people, wanting to kill themselves is feeling hopeless, you know, um, having no reason to live, burdened, feeling trapped or unbearable pain, being molested or raped by somebody and just don't share in that trauma can be horrific. I know because I went through that too. People that withdraw or isolate themselves from their family and your friends. Did your father isolate himself in any way? Because I know people have a tendency of doing that.
yes, absolutely. He definitely did. And I think the alcohol was definitely a tool to help draw him out of that isolation on the weekends. Um, but then the tool also became a huge burden for him, and at the same time.
When someone commits suicide and you first get the call, who called you and when did this happen?
Yes, so we were walking out of the door on Sunday morning to go to church, and my aunt called my husband, and I knew that that wasn't normal for her to call early Sunday morning, that something was the matter.
Mhm.
So we were getting into the car, and my husband came over to the door of the car and opened it back up and said, "You need to come back inside." And I said, "No." Uh, I knew something was the matter, and I just kept telling him, "Tell me what's going on. Tell me what's going on." And he made me go back in the house, and I knew that it was my dad at that point. He says, "It's your dad." And I say, Just tell me what's the matter." And he told me that, dad had taken his life. And that was, that was the worst day of my life. Um, I knew whenever he wouldn't tell me on the way back to the house, I knew that something really bad had happened. Um, and that began the absolute worst thing that could happen in my life was, something happening to my dad and something happening to my husband. And I felt like I had been really betrayed by the Lord because I knew that dad had those struggles. That was one of my biggest prayer requests, um, was for the safety of my dad. And I felt like I had just been, completely slapped in the face by all those years of prayer, and pleading with the Lord for my dad's safety.
Who found him?
Um, it was a Saturday night, and he was driving in his truck, and he had he had just moved into an apartment again after a failed relationship with a lady, and she had children And so he had moved out of their home, and he was not in front of his apartment. He was near his apartment still driving when he took his life. And so the surrounding neighbors came out, and that's who found him.
Wow. I can't imagine the devastating call, that, a family member, especially one of your parents,
Mm.
would commit suicide. I know when I received the call that my brother died of AIDS, in 1999, I was devastated because I wasn't there and I felt all this guilt and could I have done more? We were both living a life of homosexuality. I had came out of that life. Could I have forced him to, take his meds? But medication back then are different than they are today. Do you hold any guilt for not thinking I should have did X, Y, and Z. Because
Sure.
many people take on that guilt like it's your fault, and I knew he was suicidal, and I should have forced him to do this when you couldn't have forced him because he can make up his own mind. But for you, did you have guilt?
Yes, absolutely. Um, During the probably the first year, I think, I really, you go through all of those thoughts, right? And I think that's one of the coping mechanisms that we try to involve ourselves in some way, that we have some sort of weight or control over things, when in reality, we just don't. I have found through all of my involvement in the group, the survivors group, that if somebody is determined or already has in their mind that it's an option to take their own life, that if that's what they want to do, they're going to do it. You can have as many interventions or um, help, crisis preventions in order as you would like. But when their mind is made up that they're going to indeed end their own life, you're not going to be able to stop that. And I think that's what has helped me realize that the reality is I can't and could not have fixed, stopped, helped any more than I had with Dad making the decision to take his own life.
There's many people out there, even including myself, not now that I'm on medication and I'm doing all the right things. There's many people out there that are suicidal and would like to commit suicide for whatever reason. I've talked with a few people who would like to commit suicide, don't want to be here, feel helpless and useless and or on drugs or looking at porn, think they'll never be free. I want you to speak into the camera and talk with the people out there who are going through what you went through.
I would just say that um, you can indeed be set free from that by asking the Lord for his wisdom, for his peace. Um, the Lord tells us that He will give us the peace that surpasses all understanding, and He will indeed do that. I do believe that that is the only true prevention from taking your life. Or um, I know I struggled with those thoughts, and I have never ever had those thoughts until after my dad took his own life. And what stopped me is diving into what the Lord says about my life and how my life is precious enough that He would, um, you know, Jesus would give his own life for mine. And I thought, how ungrateful of me to consider taking my own life when the Lord values it so much more. And that really helped to snap me out of even having those own thoughts of taking my life. But the Lord, He will indeed give you that wisdom and the love and the peace when you seek after it and you ask Him for that help. He will give it to you.
Renee, you said there was a group on Facebook. Are people able to just go in and put in suicide help, or what did you put in so they could find it?
Sure, it's just a suicide. It's called Suicide Survivors. There's tons of groups. There's groups for people that have lost their parents in this way. There's people that have, lost their significant other or their siblings. Um, there's really catch all for anything you can think of on those Facebook groups, and they're very helpful to get in a community where people truly understand what it is that you're going through.
Renee, before I let you go, is suicide among a family member something that another family member could go through because of what your dad went through? Have you checked into that?
Yes. That made me really nervous when it first happened. I thought, well, first of all, it used to really offend me when people would say that it's a mental health issue. And I thought, my dad didn't have mental health struggles. Um, but after, some time went by and a lot of more understanding on my part, I do realize that it is indeed, there's a breakdown there, right? Whether you want to call it a mental health struggle or um, whatever it is definite. There's some sort of disconnect between, everything that you do in the preservation of your life, and then you actually taking that turn mentally, and you're actually able to go through with taking your life. Everything we do is the opposite of that. You want to preserve your life. And I was really nervous after it happened, like, oh no, does that mean that I have mental health issues as well? And I do think that it's a possibility, but I do know that the Lord is a healer of all those things. And so there's nothing that can be passed down that, the Lord can't fix.
Amen.
He's that knit me together in my mother's womb. And so, um, we cling on to the Lord, and all those worries will be to the wayside.
Yeah, a lot of times when, people commit suicide, it it looks intentional, but I think there's so much more that drives somebody to get to that place.
Right.
And so it's the trauma, the pain that they're going through. They just got to a place where they can't deal with it anymore. Those of you that are listening, you have a friend or family member who has committed suicide, or somebody is in the hospital, please send this podcast to them, or this Facebook um, video to them. The YouTube video will be up before the podcast come out. And if you know somebody that is dealing with suicide, please dial the number 988. It's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and they will be there to help you in any capacity. Renee, thank you for being on Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes.
Thank you for listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Acts 10:34 says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't play favorites, which means what he has done for Janet, what he has done for guests on this show, he will do for you too. If you are struggling with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. They will do their best to help you any way they can. Go to the website, janetboynesministries.com. Janet loves you, and most importantly, God loves you. Have a blessed day.